and the country was rife with uncertainty. Amidst this backdrop, the hotel president, a bustling establishment, served as a hub for travelers, businessmen, and those seeking a night of luxury. The hotel, it was known for its elegance.
In 1935, a man checked into Kansas City's President Hotel with nothing but a comb, a toothbrush, and a suitcase full of secrets. Within 48 hours, room 1046 would become a blood-soaked puzzle that defied every law of logic. No clothes, no witnesses, and a victim who spent his final breaths protecting his own killers. It's a story of Don, Lucille, and a dead man who didn't exist. Grab a drink, this gets weird. The man who came from nowhere. It was January 2nd, 1935, a Tuesday that felt like every other gray Depression-era afternoon in Kansas City. The President Hotel was the kind of place that felt grand, but carried a heavy, thick layer of cigarette smoke and secrets. When a tall, husky man with a cauliflower ear walked up to the front desk, nobody expected he'd be the catalyst for the city's most enduring nightmare. He didn't have a suitcase. He didn't have a coat. He just had a scarred face and a request for an interior room high up in the building. He signed the register as Roland T. Owen. He paid for 1 day in advance. The bellboy, Randolph Probst, escorted him to room 1046, noting the man's oddity immediately. Owen pulled a hairbrush, a toothbrush, and a tube of toothpaste from his overcoat pockets, his entire worldly inventory, and placed them in the bathroom. No luggage, no change of clothes, just a man and his hygiene. As soon as they entered the room, Owen did something that set the tone for the rest of the week. He walked straight to the window, pulled the shades tight, and retreated into the shadows. He seemed restless, perhaps even scared, but mostly just heavy, like he was carrying something that didn't fit in a suitcase. He told Probst he'd be staying for a while, and then just sat there in the dim, artificial light of the hotel lamp. To the staff, Owen was just a loner type, the kind of guy who wanted to disappear into the beige wallpaper of a mid-range hotel. But the air in 1046 was already starting to sour. Owen wasn't just staying in that room, he was hiding in it. He left the room briefly, but for the most part, he remained a silhouette behind a locked door, waiting for someone or something that hadn't arrived yet. The hotel was humming with the sounds of jazz and clinking glasses downstairs. But inside 1046, the silence was becoming deafening. But Roland Owen wasn't just an eccentric guest. He was a man waiting for a storm. The maid and the mystery. The first person to realize things were truly off was Mary Soptic, the hotel maid. On Thursday morning, she knocked on 1046 to tidy up. Owen was inside, sitting in the near-total darkness of the shuttered room. The only light came from a small desk lamp. It's the kind of atmosphere that makes your skin crawl, the stillness of a man who doesn't want to be seen. Owen apologized, telling her to go ahead and clean while he sat motionless in the corner. As she worked, Mary noticed a note on the desk. "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait, Owen's behavior was erratic. He seemed obsessed with the phone, yet never seemed to make a call. When Mary returned later that afternoon with fresh towels, she found the door locked from the outside. Assuming he was out, she let herself in, only to find Owen sitting in the dark again. This was a physical impossibility, unless someone had locked him in from the hallway. Owen didn't explain. He just stared into the gloom. By Friday, the tension had reached a boiling point. Mary arrived at the door again, but this time, a voice from inside stopped her cold. It wasn't Owen's. It was a deep, rough voice that barked through the wood, telling her to go away because they didn't need any towels. Mary knew the room was empty of supplies. She'd seen the towel rack herself, but the menace in that voice was enough to make her turn on her heel and keep walking. Later that day, the hotel's Don mystery deepened. A different staff member heard Owen talking to someone through the door, sounding like a man pleading for his life or his dignity. "No, Don," he was heard saying. "I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry." It was like a psychological tug of war played out in whispers and hushed threats. The room had become a vacuum, sucking in the curiosity of the staff, but offering nothing back but the smell of stale smoke and the feeling that Owen was no longer the one in charge of his own stay. The shades remained drawn, the light remained off. The Don character remained a ghost. Whatever was happening in room 1046 was no longer a matter of a guest being quirky. It was a hostage situation where the victim was leaning into the blade. The maid walked away with a bad feeling, but she had no idea the room was about to be painted red. A room full of red. The clock was ticking toward the end of Roland Owen's stay, but he wasn't going to leave through the front lobby. On the morning of January 4th, the hotel switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The phone in room 1046 was off the hook, creating a permanent signal that annoyed the operators. Randolph Probst, the bellboy who had checked Owen in, was sent up to fix the clumsiness of the guest. He knocked. A voice, low and thick, told him to come in, but the door was locked. When Probst yelled through the wood to hang up the phone, the voice just grunted, "Turn on the lights." Probst, confused and assuming Owen was just drunk, shook his head and walked away. An hour later, the phone was still off the hook. This time, bellboy Harold Pike went up. He used a passkey and found Owen lying naked on the bed, apparently hammered. The room was dark, but Pike could see the silhouette of the man sprawled out. He didn't look closer. He just straightened the phone, hung it up, and left. It was the biggest mistake of his life. By 11 a.m., the phone was off the hook again. When bellboy Randolph Probst returned for the third time and opened the door, the smell hit him first, the metallic copper tang of a butcher shop. He flipped the light switch, and the scene that greeted him was something out of a slasher flick decades before the genre existed. Owen was 4 feet from the door, on his knees, head in his hands. The walls, the bed, and the bathroom were splattered with blood. It looked like a frantic, violent struggle had occurred in the dark. Probst bolted for help. When the police arrived, they found Owen in a state that defied medical logic. He had been bound around the neck, wrists, and ankles with a restrictive cord. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest. One wound had collapsed his lung. His skull was fractured from repeated blows. He had been tortured, plain and simple. But here is the kicker. As the detectives leaned over this dying man, asking who had done this, Owen didn't scream for justice. He didn't whisper Don or Lucille. He looked the detective in the eye and mumbled, "Nobody." He claimed he had simply fallen against the bathtub. Even as his life leaked out onto the hotel carpet, he was protecting the monster who had broken him. He died shortly after reaching the hospital, leaving the police with a room full of blood and a victim who refused to be a witness. The police expected a murder weapon. Instead, they found a room that had been stripped bare, the Vanishing Act. Once the stretchers were gone and the sirens faded into the Kansas City fog, the detectives stepped back into room 1046, notebooks out, expecting to find the typical debris of a struggle. They looked for the knife. They looked for the blunt object that had cracked Owen's skull. They looked for the cord that had been used to bind his limbs so tightly it left deep purple welts in his skin. They found absolutely nothing. The room hadn't just been cleaned of a weapon, it had been surgically stripped of a person. Roland Owen's meager belongings, the toothbrush, the toothpaste, the comb, were gone. The clothes he had worn into the hotel vanished. There wasn't a shirt, a pair of pants, or a shoe left in the entire suite. Even more baffling, the hotel's standard issue soap, shampoo, and towels were missing. Someone had stayed behind after the bloodbath, methodically gathered every scrap of evidence, and walked out the door with it. The only things the police found were a label from a tie, an unsmoked cigarette, 4 bloody fingerprints on a lamp, and a safety pin. That was it. No Dawn, no Lucille, no murder weapon. The mystery of the locked door also took a turn for the surreal. Forensic experts realized that the door had been locked from the outside with a key. This meant that after Owen had been tortured and left for dead, his assailant had calmly stepped out into the hallway, turned the lock, and strolled past the elevators. They had essentially turned room 1046 into a tomb while the victim was still breathing. The detectives were left chasing ghosts. They had no fingerprints that matched anything on file. They had a victim who used a fake name, and they had a crime scene that was as empty as a desert. The deeper they dug, the more it felt like Owen was a character in a play who had been written out of the script mid-act. If dead men tell no tales, someone was doing a very good job of speaking for him. The funeral for a ghost. With no leads and a victim who refused to name his killer, the Roland T. Owen case went cold almost as soon as the blood dried. The body was moved to a local morgue, where it sat unclaimed, a nameless man destined for a pauper's grave in a potter's field. The police were ready to bury the mystery under 6 feet of dirt and forget about the shadowed corners of room 1046. But just as the city prepared to consign Owen to an unmarked grave, the story took a turn into the truly cinematic. It started with a phone call to the funeral home. A mysterious man, his voice low and distorted by the crackle of 30's phone lines, requested that the burial be stayed. He told the funeral director that money would be sent to cover a high-end service at Memorial Park Cemetery. He didn't give a name, he just gave an order. Shortly after, an envelope stuffed with cash arrived via special delivery, wrapped in plain blue paper. There was enough money to pull Owen out of the nobody pile and give him a funeral fit for a businessman. But the anonymous donor wasn't finished. A local florist received another mysterious order: 13 American Beauty roses to be sent to the service. The card attached to the bouquet bore 3 cryptic words written in a delicate, flowing hand: "Love forever, Lucille." The funeral itself was a haunting, lonely affair. Under the watchful eyes of undercover detectives, hoping for a break in the case, a small group of strangers gathered in the rain. None of them were Dawn. None of them claimed to be Lucille. The detectives followed every car that left the cemetery, but every lead evaporated into the Kansas City mist. Who was paying for the burial of a man who didn't exist? Was it a guilt-ridden lover or a cold-blooded organization ensuring their victim remained silent even in death? The roses withered on the fresh mound of dirt, and for a year, the mystery of Roland Owen stayed buried. The 1935 trail had gone stone cold, but the ghost of room 1046 was about to find its real name: Artemis. The mask slips. For over a year, the man in the grave was just a number and a collection of scars. He was the mystery of room 1046, a cold case gathering dust in a filing cabinet. That changed in 1936 when a woman in Birmingham, Alabama, named Ruby Ogletree opened a magazine. As she flipped through a true crime periodical featuring the mystery of the President Hotel, her heart stopped. There, staring back at her in a grainy police sketch, was her son. He wasn't Roland T. Owen. His name was Artemis Ogletree, and he was only 18 years old when he died. The revelation didn't simplify the case. It made it infinitely more terrifying. Ruby hadn't seen Artemis since he left home in 1934 to hitchhike to California. However, she had been in contact with him, or so she thought. After the date of the murder in Kansas City, Ruby had received several typed letters signed Artemis. The letters were strange, cold, and written in a slang that didn't sound like her son. One letter even claimed he had hopped a boat to Egypt. This meant that while Artemis's body was lying in a morgue in Missouri, someone was meticulously impersonating him, sending letters to his grieving mother to keep her from reporting him missing. The Lucille and Dawn names suddenly took on a sinister weight. If Artemis was just a kid from Alabama, how did he get mixed up with people capable of such high-level manipulation? The FBI joined the hunt, tracing the letters. They discovered that the Artemis letters had been mailed from various cities, but never by him. Someone had been stalking the boy, killed him in a ritualistic display of violence, and then spent months maintaining a digital age ghosting campaign via the US Postal Service to cover their tracks. The police also looked back at a strange report from a local KC wrestler who claimed he had seen a man matching Artemis's description being forced into a car by a group of toughs weeks before the murder. Was Artemis a witness to something he shouldn't have seen? Or was he a young man who had fallen into the wrong crowd, perhaps manipulated by a Lucille into a trap set by Dawn? The identification of the body gave the victim his name back, but it stripped away any hope of a simple motive. Artemis Ogletree wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a boy who had been swallowed by an underworld that didn't leave witnesses. The identification was a breakthrough, but the rabbit hole was only getting deeper. The rabbit hole of theories. With Artemis Ogletree finally identified, the police had a name, but they didn't have a motive. The case didn't just sit on a shelf. It fermented into a cocktail of wild theories that still keeps internet sleuths awake at night. If you look at the evidence, you aren't just looking at a murder, you're looking at a message. The way Artemis was killed, bound, tortured, and left to die slowly in the dark suggests something much more personal than a botched robbery. This was an execution designed to extract information or punish a betrayal. The most popular theory is the mob hit. In 30s Kansas City, the Pendergast machine ran the town, and the underworld was a living, breathing thing. Some believe Artemis had witnessed a crime or stumbled into a high-stakes gambling debt. The Don he was heard pleading with wasn't just a roommate. He was a debt collector or a professional enforcer. In this scenario, the missing clothes and items weren't just about hiding Owen's identity, they were about erasing his existence. If there's no body and no belongings, there's no crime. But the killer got interrupted, leaving Artemis alive just long enough to tell the police nobody did it. The ultimate code of silence. Then there's the jilted lover angle. We can't ignore Lucille. The yellow roses and the love forever note point toward a crime of passion. Was Artemis involved with a woman who was already claimed by a dangerous man? The Don voice the maid heard could have been a jealous husband or a brother. The torture would then be a twisted form of justice for an affair. Some theorists even suggest Lucille was a man in drag, or that the entire name was a code for a secret society. Perhaps the strangest theory involves the commercial traveler. A man reported a strange encounter with a man matching Artemis's description who seemed to be under the thumb of a mysterious, wealthy benefactor. This fits the anonymous donor who paid for the funeral. Was Artemis a protege in some illicit business that went south? The typed letters sent to his mother proved that whoever killed him had access to his life story and his travel plans. This wasn't a random hotel room killing. It was a curated disappearance. Whether it was the mob, a jealous husband, or something even darker, Room 1046 remains a void where every theory fits, but nothing sticks. The blood has been scrubbed away, but the questions still echo in the hallways of the president. The final checkout. 90 years later, Room 1046 is a ghost story that refuses to be debunked. It's the ultimate cold case because it lacks a fundamental human element, a confession. Artemis Ogletree took his secrets to the grave, choosing to protect his executioners with his final breath. Was it out of fear for his family in Alabama, or a twisted sense of loyalty to a world he had only just joined? We're left with a collection of artifacts, a comb, a toothbrush, 13 yellow roses, and a name, Dawn, that belongs to no one. Today, the President Hotel still stands, a polished monument to a gritty past. But behind the modern luxury, the air in that specific corner of the 10th floor still feels a little heavier. The case of Room 1046 reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that jump out of the dark. They're the ones who lock the door from the outside and walk away. If you loved this video, leave your thoughts in the section below and subscribe for more content like this.